Some people out there do some amazing things in games, but what happens when they come together? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 times gamers came together in-game to do unbelievable things. Number 10, in Elite Dangerous, a cancer patient was going across the galaxy to get to the Dove Enigma station. That was the ultimate, hey, this is what I want to do before, this guy was fighting terminal cancer, you can guess. So as they were getting near it, they found that the station itself had been taken offline. There's an exploit that was kind of a problem made by the developers that they copped to, and I'll tell you exactly how in a moment, but the exploit made it possible to shut down space stations by overloading them with unknown artifacts. This wasn't an intended effect, and the developers apologized, saying, sorry, we didn't really mean for this to happen and we're going to change it. But before it was even changed, the effects were counteracted by a bunch of players hauling meta-alloys to the Dove Enigma station, which was an item that counteracted the effects of the exploit. So it was brought back online in time for him to arrive. Number 9 is the Battle of BR5RB in EVE Online. Now, EVE Online is sort of a notorious online multiplayer game where there's such a hands-off approach. Very little is regulated. Almost everything is more or less player-driven. And in this case, BR5RB was a space station that was ultimately the subject of a 22-hour battle that involved more than 600 warships and cost over 11 trillion interstellar credits, the currency used in the game. If you convert that, by the way, to real-world cash, it's about $300,000. Doesn't sound like a lot until you think about the fact that it is in EVE Online and over the course of less than a day. It costs that kind of money, A, because you can convert that money into real money, and B, because ships, equipment, ammo, and other considerations actually cost money in-game. So you spend 11 trillion credits on this massive space battle, it eventually equals out to some actual physical money amount. There was actually an attempt to run a bigger battle with more players that EVE Online servers couldn't really handle, and there ended up being a bunch of people that had trouble even staying logged into the game. So while they tried to bring in a bigger battle, it ultimately ended up being too much. Still, the $300,000 battle, pretty wild, right? Number 8, you know how we've said unbelievable? That doesn't necessarily mean good. Big battles are astounding, but what about when people raid funerals, specifically in World of Warcraft? Basically, to set it up, somebody who was a pretty avid World of Warcraft player and fairly well-to-do in a horde guild suffered a stroke, and her friends wanted to organize a funeral to say farewell, her friends being lots of guild members. So they organized it according to how they knew her. Apparently she enjoyed fishing in snow, and so they did a funeral in winter spring, and as well, they posted signs and advertisements around the game saying, please leave the participants alone. They're here for a funeral, that's what this is. But a guild, by the name of Serenity Now, was like, actually, you know what, funerals, they aren't for the game, which, I mean, isn't really that convincing of an argument, decided to go after the people doing a funeral, and I don't know how to really spin that. There's no good way for that to come off. I mean, it's a virtual funeral, sure. It's not an actual funeral procession, but it is a bunch of people that have gathered to remember their actually dead friend. Yeah, it's that kind of unbelievable. We've got you on an emotional ride today on gameranx. Number 7 is a version of that same theme, but with a better outcome. In Final Fantasy XIV, a player was dying, which is not good, obviously. That's not the good element of this story. Their in-game name was Codex Valda. They were Bard, level 50, and 29 in real life, was actually brain dead in the hospital, basically kept alive for the family to say goodbye. News of this reached the game world, and people started showing up at the Free Company house on the Gilgamesh server, which is where Codex Valda played, and people just began coming and paying their respects. And when I say people, I mean a lot of people. There's a huge amount of people that stopped by on the Gilgamesh server, but also on other servers. People would line up with lanterns, they'd all kneel down, they'd sit, they'd pay their respects, and just huge number of people did this. And the stream eventually made it into the hospital room, and although the actual person behind the character probably wasn't able to acknowledge this, I'm sure it was a comfort to see just how loved this person was in game, and just how much people cared about somebody they don't even know in real life. Number 6, the No Man's Sky players had a war without having any multiplayer. I mean, this was back in 2017 when people were a little more separate. I mean, it's not an MMORPG now or anything, but it's less separate than it was back then. Still, civilizations formed, more or less. People created alliances, claimed things, and put their names on various areas. There was kind of a fake holiday that was found in an item called Unification Day, and it was actually an item that was written by Hello Games. It had text that was more or less official, and it was kind of looked at as a nod to one of the factions in the game. One of the factions that, again, to be clear, is entirely player created. Most of this was entirely ad hoc and done through naming things, etc., etc. The war that was fought was more or less exactly that as well. You can actually find news articles detailing the actual in-game diplomatic elements of this that went awry. Suffice to say, it was kind of like a real diplomatic multiplayer situation without any of the mechanics to do so. It's actually dizzyingly complex, and you could probably read about it for hours. It's that kind of interesting. Number 5, we've talked about players coming together and having massive wars in EVE Online, but let's talk about 1,000-person alliances. In fact, 4,000-person alliances. Specifically one called the Council of Stellar Management. Now, tons of people have to come together for something like this to happen. Lots of people have to agree to certain specific criteria, and the in-game alliance is balanced on trust. Now, there was a guy by the name of the Judge who sent out a message to the entire organization of the Imperium, which is bigger than the Council of Stellar Management, to be sure. But it said, "I want to be smug. You are going to love this. I'm the best CSM, or diplomat from Council of Stellar Management, to be clear." Basically, a coalition he'd been building was imploding, and somebody was getting very egocentric, so he decided that he was just going to take everything. And he did. That message he sent out was a little bit of a forebearer to him just completely taking everything. He took all of the money, all of the holdings, all of the ships, and their super weapon, which, to be clear, for non-space fiction people, their Death Star type thing, just sold it. I don't know if this dude cashed out. I don't know if you can cash out, but I do know that that was an obscene heist. I mean, I don't really know if I have the way to describe how much damage one person could have done, but the only way I think to understand it is to understand that 4,000 people came together to create something that one person took everything out of, like literally everything. Number 4, in Elite Dangerous, there is explored area that you can go to, and beyond that area is the Void. If you go into the Void, and you keep going into the Void, you're essentially, well, burning fuel. It is cool to go out further into the Void, but it's not particularly important. I'm of course simplifying a little bit. There's reasons to do it, and a commander by the name of Diluvian Ray's Cruz decided he was going to try to set a record to get the furthest distance away from the center, Sol. But he went a little too far and ran out of fuel, and his character was stuck out in the Void for 3 months. However, there is a group called the Fuel Rats, which is a group of people who goes around in Elite Dangerous finding people who are marooned with their ship due to a loss of fuel and rescue them. Well, Diluvian Ray's Cruz was rescued by them. It was actually a 600-hour rescue mission, which is wild. Basically, the Fuel Rats are a group of fuel tankers and mechanics who have organized in-game essentially specifically to help people, which is very cool. Like, I don't think that there's really anything cooler than that, in fact. You don't get anything from doing this. I'm sure that they have people's appreciation, and I'm sure that they get some in-game stuff, but 600 hours to do a rescue mission that is 600 hours in a virtual world that you will definitely not get paid for just because you think, oh, this is a need in this little world. We shall volunteer to fill it. It's awesome. Awesome people. Number 3, in Guild Wars 2, there was a bug that was honestly pretty funny, where the player's arms would be up and it looked like you were going around miming an airplane. You know, like a doofus. Well, in 2015, they decided that everyone would be doing that for the whole day on April 1st. That would be their April Fool's joke. And it was great. There is footage of this event where everybody is running around looking like an absolute doofus. I mean, it is genuinely hilariously goofy looking. People dancing and making music videos to this with everybody doing the airplane. A few people didn't like it because they wanted to play the game, but most people played along and a ton of great community moments came out of this. And I would definitely recommend watching the Do the Airplane song video. Number 2, a man was having a seizure in VR chat, which, if you know what VR chat is, it's basically 3D meme VR. And instead of everybody kind of making jokes and being silly about it, they actually took it serious and were trying to communicate with him, trying to find out if there was something they could do, if there was anything that could help. At one point, people were trying to ward people with flashing LED colors away from the person who had the seizure, just in case it might be something that may reinitiate the seizure. And only one person actually tried to be a dick. They tried to sit on the person who was having the seizure, and they basically got them away from him really quick. Honestly, the video is kind of harrowing at the start, but once you get past the initial event and you see that people actually care, it's a really touching video, actually. And number 1, a small group of players spent 7 years trying to get into a cutscene room in Halo Reach. Now, when I say this is unbelievable, this is something that's just... there's a 15-minute video that, unless you watch the whole thing, you don't understand exactly how wild this is. Now, there is a cutscene in Halo Reach where there's a room that nobody ever sees during the course of the game is seen. This small group of players came together and developed an elaborate series of moves that allowed them to load and deload and disappear and reappear and platform across a bunch of ghosts, which are vehicles to people who are uninitiated to the Halo universe, that would be left in a void when the maps were loaded. I mean, I can't even describe exactly how it is. Like, you're literally jumping from ghost to ghost to get over a death barrier to get into a room that exists in nowhere. And that's the only goal. It's all they did. It's just they wanted to do something that was impossible. And they did. And even though it might not sound like an interesting thing watching people do an elaborate, choreographed, perhaps totally insane series of movements to get into a cutscene room, it is really worth it. Like, I'm not going to tell you it's going to change your life because it's not, but it's amazing. And a quick bonus point, people basically made Football Manager into an actual manager of a soccer team in France. Julien Ypen, the boss of the team, set it up so that 2,000 people democratically choose everything about real football games, that's soccer to North American people, in exactly the same way you would if you were playing Football Manager, which is totally wild. It's literally just done through an app. It basically makes the actual football game a football game, and tons of people play. Have you ever seen gamers come together to do something unbelievable? Leave us a comment, let us know. And if you like this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe, and do not forget to click the notification bell. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time, right here on GameRanx.